Welcome back, class. This is our sixth week. Sixth week? Sixth week. Yeah, this is our sixth week. War and Revolution. We have finally gotten to really one of the all-star events of this period. And really, I know that I've been all over the place in terms of extending the time period. And I think all of us can agree, though, or at least hopefully would understand, that when it comes to talking about world history, in this period of 1900 to 1945, you really can't leave out some of that stuff that happened 3 or 4 decades before. It's simply impossible to do because, as we've seen leading up to this point, so much of what drives this period of time is very, very short, barely 50 years, not even 50-year period, is rooted in the late 19th century. We're talking imperialism and colonialism and social Darwinism and industrialism and industrial capitalism, all of the things that make the modern world actually come preceding this period. And so if we just dove right in and talked about, I'm trying to think, social Darwinism, but we won't put it into the context of industrialism with such a degree that I have done before or done up to this point, then you would probably be lost or you wouldn't fully get it. I would at least want you to appreciate that. And so that is why we spent so much time on that. But now we have finally gotten to one of the all-star events of this period, the First World War, or the Great War, as it was known at the time, because they obviously didn't know they were going to have a second war later on. So World War I and World War II are really the strongest central events that happened during this period. Oh, there are other important things that happen over the course of 1900 to 1945. But as far as two major central events, World War I and World War II are perhaps the most important, because not only are they the result of all of the things that we've discussed culminating to this point, but they also give rise to more of the stuff that leads in, well, from World War I to World War II, and from World War II into the Cold War period up until this very day, which we won't be talking about. But you can at least understand how significant both of these wars are. War is a very tricky thing. And before I continue with this lecture, I just want to point out something that is important. I hope that all of you will take to heart, is that war typically will solve some problems. It will cause many others. But war itself is not really the action of revolution and the action of change. Typically, those things already were sorted out years before war ever begins. War is really just a symptom that comes from all of these changes. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me give you an example from American history. So we know that during in the beginning of American history, we have the Revolutionary War, and the Revolutionary War begins in 1776. However, we also know that there was fighting that happened in 1775 and 1774. So the revolution was very much on by that point. We just didn't have a Declaration of Independence. But then if you talk to other people, historians, they would say that really the revolution begins in the 1760s. Well, why the 1760s? And that's because you have the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act is when the colonists, who would eventually call themselves Americans, began to see themselves culturally different than the British. They were a different people. And that is perhaps even more important than the war, because although the war gives us the ability to stand independently and say that, that mindset is one that simply would not go away easily. So I just wanted to point that out, that when it comes to World War I and World War II, there's going to be so many things that go before, during, and after, in between, stuff that's set in motion that is not the war does not come and then those things come after. It usually is the other way around. Now, this week, we have a kind of a unique setup here. We have a arrangement where we have a lot more crash course videos than what we typically have. We have 3 videos created by John Green on World War I. And this is very helpful, at least for me, because it means I don't have to do as much this week. And that means that I can make this week relatively short for me. And next week, I can do a normal lecture on the soldier's experience during the war, which is a unit of my own design. So this week, I want to keep this lecture to a minimum. I'm going to have a couple of videos here, but I'm not going to try and rehash everything that John Green is going to rehash. He handles it quite fine. There are a few things that I'll cover, but for the most part, the cover that he covers, but for the most part, I'm going to try to just fill in those gaps. Now, as always, we have here some terms we need to be aware of, so do jot those down for your notes. And we have a big question for this week. And if you notice, our discussion board this week has a question that's very similar to the big question. So feel free to incorporate both as you move forward and try to understand what the causes of World War I were and also who was ultimately responsible for World War I, if anybody was actually responsible for World War I. Now, before we move into the main part of our lecture, and like I said, I'm going to keep this relatively short. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post several videos here in the form of this one link. So I want you to click on this link. I want you to watch the videos. It's going to cover geography in World War I. And this is important, not as boring as that sounds, because border shifting and changes are ultimately what drive the war to begin in the first place. And I will rehash and cover that again in the next video. So I want you to watch this link. There's several videos. They're not particularly long. There's several videos. I want you to watch them. They are actually quite fascinating. Then I want you to come back and watch my second video. After you watch my second video, then you may watch the crash course videos. That's the sequence I want you to do. So go ahead, take care of that, and I will be waiting on the next slide.